After e4, e6, d4 and d5, the French defense is on the board. Knight c3 and knight f6 is the Steinitz. The move now is e5, closes the center and makes this bishop a future weakness. Knight goes to d7, and now the move is f4, as this is well known. c5 is the move to continue, and black starts putting pressure on the d4 square, so knight f3 and now c6, bishop e3. This is all theory. Now what happens is there's plenty of moves that can be played now. First of all, I'm going to go through bishop e7. After bishop e7, white has to play queen to d2 and then castle longside. So after castling, now white takes the pawn in c5. This seems a little unusual, but the reason is that because white is one step away from castling longside and the queen and the rook will be in an open file, it's good to open the file by getting rid of the pawn from the d file. So the pawn can be recaptured with a knight or with a bishop. So let's say first knight to c5, now long castle. White's got a lot of pieces guarding the d4 square, so the d pawn is not going to be a problem. Lots of moves are available right now. The main idea for black is to attack on the queen side, also because, well, clearly the black player will not be able to attack from the king side. Also, our king is on the queen side anyway. The usual pattern is something like a6, b5, or rook to b8, or queen to a5. These kind of moves will have to happen because it's basically the only thing that black can do. This bishop can't move. This rook can't go to any open file anytime soon. This bishop has got literally not a single square to go to. So after a6, white now plays queen to f2, doubling the attack on the knight, forcing black to do something about it. So can the knight move? Well, can't go to e4 because it will be taken for free since the pawn is pinned. Can't go basically to anywhere else without basically undeveloping his own pieces. So after queen to b6, for example, knight a4 wins the game. There are 3 pieces attacking this knight and 2 defending. And the thing is that the knight is pinned, but the black player will be losing the queen, and there are no other black pieces that are able to reinforce the defense of that knight. So that means that queen b6 cannot be played. So after the queen f2 move, black plays b6. After this move, white simply plays king to b1. The reason is very simple. It's just a usual move to get the king a bit safer. So now what can black do? There's almost no moves that make much sense. According to the engine and also the usual approach of the French defense players, the move that black plays now is just pawn to f6. The idea is to start swapping stuff so to get the pieces going because black is completely blocked. So after pawn to f6, pawn will be taken, and after bishop takes back, white simply plays queen to e1. It's always good to put your queen on the e file when there's a pawn in e6. They cannot be defended by any other pawn. This is typical against the French defense or against the Caro-Kann. Also, it's good to get the queen away from the file of the opponent's rook, which is open. So the position of the black player is not that bad right now. It's not like black has a huge disadvantage or anything, except he just can't really move stuff that much. A move like a5 is bad because the b pawn will not be able to be supported afterwards, so this attack isn't going anywhere. This move cannot be played because the knight will fall, and the pawn can't move because of the rook d5 attack on the queen. So there's no... The thing about the French defense is that often in these kind of positions there's not many moves that can be played without the position to get worse. So black has to develop his pieces though, so after a move like queen c7, not many other moves are possible, but the plan now for white is simple. It's rook g1 and then g4, g5, h4, h5, h6 and so on, depending on how black reacts, but these pawns are going to be moving as soon as possible. After rook to g1 and black's development of the last piece, probably black's play only will have to come from open files, like for example the f file is open and the c file, so white can push g4. And now what does black play here? Well, g5 is coming, and well, h6 doesn't work. It's just a beginner move because g5 is coming anyway. And it's just this h6 move is just removing defenders from the opponent's king. After this, So because there's an attack that just started on the side of the board, black's only choice to counterplay will be on the center. Before getting completely suffocated on the king side, black tries and take the center, has to play something like d4. Now it seems like this pawn is being attacked plenty of times, but the idea is that after a bunch of swaps, knight takes, and then bishop takes, and rook takes, then black should be able to recapture this pawn. Now this is to assume that black will play computer moves, literally. That is also black's best chance. After this, now queen goes to g3, pinning the rook. The rook can't move without losing the queen. So the logical and best move to continue for black is rook to f8, and now white develops the last piece. Bishop c4 will be attacked with the tempo, d3 will be taken, so bishop e2 is the only move left. And now the plan is simple. The rook will have to go to the only available open file, and the idea is simple. It's to put more and more attack on the d7 bishop, which is only defended by the queen and the bishop and the knight. So the idea is to play b4 and then win the piece in the game, which means that black's only way to respond is pawn to e5, stopping b4. However, white will simply play a3, and then b4 is happening anyway. So what can black play now? Well, if the queen tries to get away from trouble, like something like queen c8 for example, then b4 is happening. So what black needs to do is just move the bishop. So after something like bishop e8, now finally the white player takes the rook in f4, and now black can either take the rook, but that would be pinning its own rook, and then there will be problems. So black takes with the queen, also activating the queen, and now the last move to consolidate the advantage is rook to d6. The idea is to go and take a free pawn. This pawn cannot be pushed because it will be taken for free. This position is far beyond theory. It's much further away than I actually wanted to go to. The reason why in this line only I've decided to go so far is because I wanted to go through all the concepts of how to play against the Steinitz defense and see eventually if black were to play just perfectly, the white player is still able to win no matter what. So now going back to the previous scenario, I just wanted to go through another potential move. After queen to f2, there was a double attack on the knight. One move was knight back to d7. It's a move I didn't go through, so I'm going to go through it right now. Again, the plan is the same. It's actually very similar. Well, white has to play this king b1 move for king safety, and after b5, which is the only move that makes sense for black to play, white continues with queen to g3. It's always good to put your queen on the opponent's king file. The plan is just to play bishop to d3, attacking h7, and then pushing the pawns eventually, or even knight to g5, maybe f5 eventually. A lot of things that can happen. So black will have to go on with his attack. Black has decided, has committed the game to playing on the queen side. So after b4 and knight to a4, queen to a5, these are all typical moves. White will have to play a little bit defensive for the moment and play now b3. So now what does black play? Black will have to develop the bishop. Well, black can play the knight to b6 and knight to c5. Well, knight to b6 is not possible because the knight will be taken for free. Well, after knight to c5, for example, then simply bishop takes, and after only move bishop takes, now knight to g5, and white is comfortable. The idea is queen to d3, with a checkmate threat, and h4. All these moves are coming anyway. The black bishop is completely useless in all of this. The black queen it's kind of useless. Can't really move anywhere. And there's 3 pieces on the only open file, which means that none of these rooks will be able to do anything at all. A move like h6 is met by h4. This is how passive black pieces are in this specific variation, because basically white can even afford to lose a piece in exchange of just an open file, because white will have all the time in the world to just reach the open file and go for an unstoppable mate threat. So going back to the previous scenario, in this position, black going knight to c5 is wrong. Bishop b7 makes much more sense. After this move, now the idea again remains the same, and it's always going to be pretty much the same against the Steinitz. It's bishop to d3, still putting pressure on the weak square and doing some great gift ideas. Now what does black play? In these scenarios, black will play a move like f6. Obviously taking in this case will be completely wrong, because the knight in f6 is the best defender of the h7 square. So taking the f6 pawn, allowing black to bring the knight back to a useful square and get to defend the king will be completely wrong. White has to play queen to h3 now, threatening the obvious, plus the e6 square, so this is winning. A move like h6, for example, is met by f5. This is a great move. The knights can't go and take the pawn because it's defended twice. The threat is amazing. f6. Well, simply the pawn cannot take because it's pinned, and black will have to give up a piece. So either the bishop or the knight. Bishop moving away will allow checkmate. So after h6, f5 is the crashing move. And of course, taking allows white to take the pawn in h6 with the checkmate threat. They cannot be stopped without black giving up a piece in f6. And if, one more option, if black plays a move like f5, how to deal with this? Well, here white can take en passant. So white doesn't have to worry about the knight taking back in f6 in this specific case, because bishop e6 wins the queen. These are all patterns that have to be remembered when facing the Steinitz defense with the bishop e7 and the a6 b5 variation. Of course, I don't assume that this exact stuff is going to happen in the games of those who are following this, but these patterns will repeat themselves forever because I've encountered them so many other times. So if it's not going to be this exact position, these patterns will arise after playing against the French defense if you play with the same repertoire each time. I'm going to make another example about this. So in this example, going back to the previous line, here the queen goes to f2, and now black plays knight back. White goes king to b1, and b5 is happening, and queen to g3. Black has started an attack on the queen side, white starts on the king side. Now the queen can go to a5. Unlike before, I went through what happens after b4, which starts an attack on the knight immediately. Now white doesn't have to worry about the knight immediately, so white can go on and play a more active move. So the next move is f5, thematic move. Again, the threats are the same. Pawn to f6 is deadly, bishop to h6 is happening. So what does black do? Well, black will have to do the only thing that makes sense without getting crushed, because what else can black do? This is the exact position that happened before. Again, taking will be just wrong, so black will have to continue his attack b4. Now, unlike before, the knight will not be able to go to a4, and there's no problem in leaving it here. Make an immediate mate threat, bishop h6. What happens now is simple. The only move for black is pawn to g6. It's literally the only move to avoid mate. And now an amazing sequence starts. White can play knight to d5, saving the knight from the pawn, but just going into the hands of another pawn, but getting this pawn away from the e-file. Well, the queen cannot take the knight because of the rook, and after pawn takes, because the knight there was way too dangerous, now white, as if nothing had just happened, just plays bishop to d3. Very simple. The idea is to just swap everything around the opponent king and then get the queen to penetrate and checkmate. Black's queen is powerless, black's knights are useless. Going back to the previous position, one more scenario I need to show is after queen to f2, the usual double attack on the knight. Earlier I went through queen b6, which loses to knight a4. So now I'm going to go through queen a5, which is another move to put more defense on the knight and also activate the queen. So now white has to play the usual king b1, and now black will have to make a move. Again, the only file that is open is the c file. But there's 3 pieces there right now. So in order to put the rook there and make it useful, black will have to be moving all of these pieces, but at the same time that will lose control of all the central squares. So black's idea basically is to push the queenside pawns. The b5 pawn cannot be pushed yet because otherwise the knight is taken for free. So after the only move that seems to make sense, like bishop d7, white continues with the usual f5. The idea again is to eventually put the queen in g3, the pawn to f6, and then bishop to h6, and so on. Obviously, taking the pawn in f5 would be really bad after rook takes d5. The rook will be in an open file, putting more pressure on this knight, which is already pinned. Black's best move instead of bishop d7 is actually b6, but I'm going to stop it right there because there's no need to continue way too many moves out of theory. The idea here is very simple. White will just play knight to d4, attack this knight, trying to release a little bit of pressure on the queen side because of the opponent's pieces, and after a swap, bishop d4 and then bishop to b7, The bishop dreams of being able to do something, also because this pawn is not blocked. The pawn in d5 is not blocked by another pawn, so eventually he might be able to move. White eventually goes on with bishop d3. This bishop here is amazingly placed. Against the French defense, you got this close center. This bishop is usually a monster. And well, what does white do here? White is able to push these pawns without ever worrying about anything, because all of these pawns would be stuck there. None of these pawns can move without going through the same patterns that were seen already before. So after knight takes bishop, presumably the black player will try to take the opponent's bishop pair, and if he weren't to do so, then that's just good for white. The rook is developed, and it's going. All of the white's major pieces will be transferred on the king side for an attack. So starting this from the beginning, after knight f6, e5, knight d7, and f4, this is all very well known theory. Everyone knows this. Knight c6, bishop e3. Now bishop e7 is the variation that I'm going through. Queen d2, and after castling, the pawn can be taken because white knows that the black king is not going to castle queenside, which is not supposed to happen anyway. But now white has the certainty of controlling the d file with the two major pieces, because white is one step away from castling. Earlier I went through what happens after knight takes c5. Now I'm going to go through what happens after bishop takes c5, and now again white just castles. Now many moves are possible. The plan is the same though. White will exploit the closed center here to just start pushing pawns, especially h4, h5, and so on. So what does black do here? Well, the pawn cannot be pushed because there's too many attackers there. Black will have to start transferring pieces and start an attack on the queen side. First, I'm going to go through what happens after a bit of an annoying move that I encountered a lot. It's bishop takes. In this case, it seems like this is not going to be a wild game because of the swaps. But after this move, black tries to transfer this knight to b6. The idea was to remove one of the defenders of the d4 square. Anyway, white has no problems at all. Pushes the pawn h4. White has to remember that nothing will stop him from pushing all of these pawns and create some chaos. But bishop will reach d3 and the rook will reach the king side. So that is what happens if they take the bishop. If bishop takes bishop, which can happen. What this bishop here, this bishop move is a move that is played by players that don't understand that the black bishop of the French defense, the one in c8, is the bad one already, so there's absolutely no reason to give away the good one. So if black plays a move that looks better, like queen to b6 now, which is a move I've seen a lot as well, the pawn was actually supposed to be in h2, so now white has to play knight to d4. The goal is to play knight a4, well, in case black allows it. If black plays, let's say, any other move, even h6, well, knight a4 wins simply because the knight's attacking the queen, and so the queen will have to move. She doesn't have any access to the light diagonal because of the bishop. So if she goes to b4, then there's a swap, take, and then knight takes, bishop, knight takes, and that's a fork. If queen goes to d8, then just very simple, knight takes, and then knight takes here, wins a piece. If black takes back, then the bishop takes, and if the knight moves, then the knight's attacking the queen, so black will have to take it, and then white wins a piece. Whereas the other scenario is if the queen goes to c7, which is probably the least problematic, then white will play knight to e6, forking the queen and rook, which means that the pawn will have to take the knight, and then the knight will be able to take this bishop, and white's up a pawn and it's got much better position. This means that after the pawn has to return there. So after the knight e4 move, now it's black to move. Black's best move is to take the knight, and now white continues by taking back, obviously, and then bishop takes, queen takes, and now these queen and rook are putting so much pressure on the d5 square, and after a move like f5, the control of the d file will be completely white. Now the black player is left with the c8 bishop, which is the useless one. White's plan is the usual, h4 will happen. So what does black do now? Whether black takes the queen or just simply suggests a swap in c5 or whatever, white ignores it and plays h4. Well, if black takes the queen, then white will just take back, and white's chances are much better after this usual moves. So going back to the previous scenario, after black castles, white takes the pawn, and I'm going to go through again what happens after. Bishop takes. Now white castles, of course, and then earlier I went through what happens after bishop swaps with bishop and queen b6 and stuff like that. So now I'm going to go through the usual, even more popular moves like a6 and the usual b5 plan and so on. Now white takes the bishop, black takes back, queen goes to e3, attacking the knight. White's intention is the same. The black bishop is gone, the dark square bishop is gone, so the white pawns on the king side are ready to push. Black has to do something. Well, the b6 move will be passive in a way that the whole point of playing a6 was so to support b5. So black plays something like queen b6. This is met by the usual king b1. White's plan is the usual. Bishop to d3. Nothing to worry if the knight takes, because then after the queen takes, again the knight is jumping to g5, the pawn is supporting h4, and the rook will be open as soon as the swaps happen. The queen will be making a threat. Pawn to h6 is not a problem because we've seen it before, and the queen is also able to reach the h file anytime, and especially the black player is not going to be able to offer any support anytime soon, actually, because of this pawn chains and some sort of wall that black has created between the pieces and the attack he has developed on the queen side and the king side, where white will be attacking, except white's king is much safer.